Hello Year 6, Chapter 18 of The Lion Boy. Only a few more chapters to go until we've finished it. It's very exciting. The chief executive smiled at them. He was short. He had springy hair and pinky grey skin and a very clean white shirt. He looked extremely ordinary. He'd had all their bindings removed. No need for that kind of thing, he had said, in a voice that suggested he was surprised that they had been used at all. Now, he said, his desk was very big. You know why you're here? No, we don't, said Magdalene. She wasn't feeling too well. To work with us, cried the chief executive. We don't want to, said Aniba. You don't want to complete research on your asthma cure in a calm and happy environment with all the money and help you need and the promise of plenty of investment in the future? Oh, said Aniba, is that what you're offering? And there were we thinking you had kidnapped us and brought us here bound, gagged and threatened because you know damn well we wouldn't cooperate with a bunch of crooks like you. The chief executive looked hurt. Doctor, he said, the conspiracy works for the advancement of mankind. What could be more marvellous than a cure for this dreadful scourge of asthma, which torments our children and blights their futures? We have for years been making the drugs which treat asthma and give the little ones some relief, but how much better to cancel our asthma forever? Magdalene gave a low, nasty laugh. Tell me, she said, looking up suddenly, how much money do you make each year from asthma drugs? The chief executive did his hurt look again, but she kept talking. And how much do you expect to make from a cure? Which would be better for your profits, a one-off cure or carrying on selling medicine for the rest of time? Do you want to use our cure, or do you just want to make sure nobody else does? She started coughing. The chief executive veiled his eyes. Well, if you're going to be like that about it, he murmured. Magdalene threw up. The chief executive raised one eyebrow and lifted the telephone. Miss Barakat, he said, the professor and the doctor seem to be ill. May I suggest a visit to the wellness unit? They don't seem to be very well at all, but nothing we can't sort out, I'm sure. Nothing a couple of weeks of treatment won't solve. He put the phone down and smiled. I'll see you in a couple of weeks then, he said. I'm really looking forward to working with you. The lioness easily, swiftly followed the scent the others had left. They negotiated the ledge and terrified the Moroccan, and they were just about to set out on the ledge across the river when something extremely peculiar happened. Charlie and the lions were at the moment at the other end of the bridge. They had only to cross a small square, Place Volibert, and the station would be just there to the left. But as they hesitated at the far side of the bridge, waiting for a quiet moment to cross, they heard it too. It was a howl. It was a howl of such intensity, loneliness and longing that Charlie's hair stood on end. It sounded like the end of the world, like losing your mother, like looking in the mirror and not knowing your own face. It sounded like the loss of all you held dear. Tears came to Charlie's eyes and terror to his heart at the sound of it. What could make such a sad noise? Who could be that sad? But if Charlie was shocked by the sound, the lions were more so. The lionesses stopped still and listened. The three lions with Charlie stopped dead, dropped low to the ground and turned their heads to the direction it was coming from, across the square to the right. They were baring their teeth and wrinkling their noses. The whiskers were quivering, alert to every vibration. The young lion started to growl, a low, mean, motionless sound that Charlie had never heard before. They were terrifying. Charlie desperately wanted to say something, to calm them, to change the situation. He'd turned them in the Moroccan's chamber, perhaps. He could now too. He made as if to speak, but the oldest lion flashed his eyes and gave a tiny, authoritative twitch of his ear, which left Charlie in no doubt that he was to do nothing, say nothing, and probably even think nothing. Up by the bridge, the lioness began to run. The howl came again, lower than the first one, but longer, and if anything, sadder and more piercing. That lion's ears twitched. Charlie knew that lions can judge distances from noise, and if two noises came from the same direction, they can tell which comes from nearer and which from further away. Were they doing that now? Their faces were totally concentrated, as they were now free, desperate, and united. He could imagine them in the wild, hunting in a pack, alert to every movement on the African plain, hearing things he couldn't hear, running faster than he could ever run, leaping. The young lion was looking at the oldest lion. The oldest lion held his concentration, thinking, considering. Finally, he blinked. He turned to the young lion and said, You stay guard our friend and your sister. At this, the young lion's eyes flashed green and furious, and he made as if to contradict his father. But the oldest lion raised his head the tiniest amount and gave his son a look of such haunting scorn that the young lion immediately fell back and turned his head a little to one side. But you could see he didn't like it. Charlie said, "Sir, what is it?" The oldest lion didn't reply. He merely twitched his ear again, and then he was gone, his tail hanging on the air behind him as he picked up speed, bounding like an uncoiling spring into the darkness towards the direction of the noise. For a moment he waited for a gap when the traffic was light. Then he flashed across the road and across the bridge, a quick shadow in the night, a streak of darkness. Charlie went to the edge of the bridge. The young lion and Orsina had hidden themselves. Only a low growl called to him to where they were lurking in a tiny patch of park on the corner. He sat down against the wall, suddenly exhausted. What was this thing? Why were the lions so upset about it? And how long was it going to take? They didn't have that long to find the train and find a way on. The night was cool and the ground was cold beneath his bottom. Maybe there was a change in the weather coming. He shivered. Alcina prowled over and arranged herself beside him. She felt warm and comforting, and he was pleased to be able to be near her without Macomo or anyone else he had to hide their friendship from. The young lion stood still, his face to the direction of the howl, alert, mysterious, both scared and scary. "What's down there?" asked Alina quietly. "Well, I don't know," said Charlie. "I thought knew you, the way you all reacted." I don't mean what is making the noise," she explained. "I mean what thing or place is there. You've been looking at maps. You know where things are." Charlie ran his mind back. "The Jardin des Palace is down there," he said. "It's a park, and the museums of natural history, and so on, and the zoo." "The zoo," she said softly. "But that wasn't just an animal, was it?" "I don't know what it was," she said. Charlie wanted to call the young lion. He wanted to know what he thought. But the young lion was a million miles away from him, not in space, but in spirit. He was pure animal at that moment, pure watching animal. Charlie felt that he would not even hear him if he called. "Do you have an idea?" Charlie asked. "You must have an idea. Why did it upset you all so much?" "It upset you too," said Alcina. "Yes," said Charlie, and he shivered again as he thought of the belly-curdling, tears-making cry. "But not as much, because it's not your—" She broke off. "My what?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't know." She laid her chin on her folded paws and lay still, eyes open, no longer available to conversation. Charlie felt very alone. Several minutes passed. "We're going to miss the train," Charlie thought, and a great fear and worry came over him. How could they take it anyway, without the mothers? Why had the oldest lion gone rushing off without any explanation? Had he been wrong to trust them? He could hardly believe so. They were all in it together. But why hadn't he explained before he went? Charlie didn't like the grown-ups who were meant to be with him going off without saying where or why, even if they didn't mean to. Charlie turned over sadly and found himself snuggled up with Alcina. She didn't mind. She patted him absent-mindedly with her tail. But she, like her brother, was fully occupied, silently watching and waiting. After another few minutes, Charlie lost his patience. He leapt to his feet. "Everybody else seems to have forgotten," he said, "but we have a train to catch, and if we don't catch it, then God knows what's going to become of us, and I for one don't want to risk it. So would you please one of you go and get the grown-ups so we can get a move on?" The two lions turned and stared at him, but whatever they were going to say in response will never be known, because at that moment the howl came again, much, much nearer. An immense form came bounding out of the darkness towards them from the direction of the Jardin des Palaces. Behind it, looking small in comparison, low and slinking against the river wall, came 4 lions. The young lion and Alcina leapt out to block the form's way. The oldest lion and the lionesses moved up behind it to make a circle. Charlie stood back in horrified and fearful fascination. Were they hunting it? Were they going to kill it? And quite apart from that, what was it? The creature at the centre of the circle of lions was, well, it was a lion. Charlie had no doubt about that, but it was like no lion that Charlie had ever seen. For a start, it was enormous, half as big again as the oldest lion. Its 4 quarters were were taller than its hindquarters, hugely powerful and muscular. It had short, strong legs, a long head sloping into a long neck, and its back sloping on down rather like a hyena's, and its tail was short and stumpy looking. Its eyes were flat and defensive, but its face gave an impression of fear, anguish, and deep exhaustion. However, Charlie hardly noticed that, because this face also bore something else, something rather more immediately impressive. The lion had a set of saber teeth. The phrase came straight into Charlie's mind as he looked at them. That's what they were, 2 big, long, strong, sharp teeth, gleaming white and hard in the darkness, curving down and back from the creature's upper jaw, like tusks, so big they could never fit inside his mouth. Saber teeth. The creature looked across at Charlie and bared them at him. Charlie took one look and screamed. He screamed and screamed. The sound broke the standoff between the lions. The creature turned as if to leap on Charlie, provoked no doubt by the sound of weakness. He forgot for a moment that he was a victim of the rest of the lions. The oldest lion roared and leapt over to Charlie to protect him. The young lion roared and pounced and tried to bite the creature's leg. The lionesses all jumped on top of the creature. The creature howled again. No, 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 yelled Charlie. Stop it. People will come. Shut up and stop. Stop, stop, stop. He was yelling, of course, in cat. His lions, amazed that he should be so bossy to them, stopped for just long enough to stare. The creature, no doubt having never heard a human speak cat, was astounded that he suddenly cringed, and in that moment all the fight and the running away and the attacking and the defending went out of him. He slumped down on the pavement and just lay there, his great teeth reflecting the lamplight, his great mouth unclosable, and though, as Charlie knew, lions don't cry, it seemed as if there were tears in his eyes. Surrounded by this troop of wild beasts, Charlie for a moment understood what Makoma must feel in the ring. He had controlled them. He felt strong and powerful. But how could he communicate with them? Could they really understand him? Now they were free and out of the artificial circumstances of the circus. Could he and they really be a team? And who was this new thing? Was he an enemy? Charlie pulled all his courage and intelligence together and spoke. Into the park, he said. Get invisible now. The animals slunk swiftly into the shadows. Charlie addressed himself quickly and urgently to the oldest lion. Sir, he said, we have the train to catch. Has our plan changed? The oldest lion eyed him. Then, no, he said. You brought someone. Is he joining us? The great creature raised his head and looked at Charlie and at the oldest lion. The oldest lion twitched his whiskers. Quickly, ordered Charlie. Someone could appear at any moment. The creature bowed his head again and spoke in a low, harsh, difficult voice. Yes, he said. Charlie breathed out a long breath of relief. Lionesses, he said. What happened? There's no time now, said the oldest lion, glancing around, but Charlie interrupted. Where is my enemy? He asked. He desperately needed to know that Raffi was, what? Alive? Dead? Off the trail? He's coming after us, said the yellow lioness. We only delayed him. He's got our scent, and he'll be along as soon as the lock opens again. The fear returned. Raffi could raise a fuss. Raffi could ruin their escape. Charlie wasn't afraid of him, but he was afraid of what he could do. Then let's get a move on, said Charlie. We've no time to lose. The front of the station was bright and busy, so they skirted around to the back. The tracks, Charlie knew from the map, led out behind the facade they were approaching, so they took a dark, quiet street down the side. The strange new creature fell in behind them, keeping to the dark corners and the walls as the others did. The houses were dark. The line sloped from rubbish pile to closed-up drink stall, from dim doorway to darkened stairwell, landing in shadows, being shadows. The street led into the goods yard, where the lions filled some mail trolleys and lay quietly beneath them, out of sight, panting a little as they rested. The creature found a separate one. No one was talking. Charlie was reasonably sure that the fight wouldn't break out again while he went ahead to check out the best way to get to the Orient Express. He strolled back round into the station. He wanted to run, but he didn't want to draw attention. He knew it was meant to be a platform 1. There it is. He strolled up the platform. His legs were tense and his feet heavy. The train was fine and high and long, so long that the front of it extended beyond the end of the platform. Beyond that, the tracks faded into darkness, to be lit only by the headlights of the trains passing along them. And just beyond the darkness was the goods yard, dark and closed now, where the would-be stowaways were waiting. All they had to do was come round through the darkness to the front of the train and get on board on the far side, hidden from the light and crowds of the platform side. There was no train on that far side, no one on the platform. With just a little luck, nobody would notice them at all. There was no time to spare. Charlie hurried back to the lions, who hooded their eyes again. The timing was good. 12:20. Quick! Charlie called, low and hurried. Before another train comes. Good luck, quick! Yellow eyes flashed. Charlie flipped himself onto the young lion's back with all the skill of a trick rider, and they were off, hurtling out and across. Speed gave them invisibility. All the time Charlie's mind was flicking over the things that threatened them. Who is this new creature? Does he put our plan in danger? Where would Raffy and Troy be by now? The goods yard led direct to the tracks, gleaming beneath the lions' paws. They lifted their feet high to avoid the cold metal, stepping over onto the wooden sleepers. Huge and dim in the darkness with the station lights behind it, the train looked tremendously tall. Charlie hoped and hoped that he had not underestimated the height and that the lions had not overestimated their strength and prowess. And anyway, they were all tired by now. First the engine and fuel wagon, then the luggage wagon, their destination. No one would be there to hear them as they jumped on board. Go, 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 Charlie urged silently in his head. The lionesses went first. 1, 2, 3. They slunk along in the darkness by the wheels, seemed almost to halt as they swayed back on their haunches, and then took off in a great curving leap that landed them silently and magnificently onto the roof of the train. How could he have doubted them, these fabulous animals who had seen pounce all over the ring cage? Of course they could do it. Next, Arsena. She wasn't as strong or practiced, but she had the energy of youth, and her aunts and mother were there to catch her. Then the new creature. The jump was no problem to him. He was so big he almost could have stepped on, but he gave a short, powerful jump with his strong back legs. Next, the oldest lion. Charlie was worried about him too. He was old. Could he make it? The oldest lion looked superciliously at the train, calculating the height in his mind, and he took a few delicate paces back. Then he shook his head and seemed to change his mind. Rather than take a running leap as the lioness has done, he paced directly to the front of the carriage and swiftly, elegantly scrambled up on the apparatus between them and up the fuel wagon's maintenance ladder, then stepped over onto the luggage wagon. All 6 lions were now lying flat, spread-eagled on the roof. Charlie couldn't see them at all, just as it should be. He glanced around him. Nobody. His heart was hammering. A few platforms away, an engine was starting to chug and rattle. The young lion was now preparing to leap, and Charlie was thinking that he too might make the maintenance ladder, and just at the moment he heard voices. The young lion flashed his yellow eyes at Charlie, blinked and flew. He was right to, of course, because though there is only very little excuse for a young boy to be wandering alone in the dark on a railway line, there's even less excuse for a lion. It was the extra driver and the extra guard coming on duty a little late, frankly. The driver was complaining about having to come out into the dark, on the tracks, to the cab. Although the bulk of the train was between him and them, Charlie drooped to the ground. He was just by the gap between the carriages. Did he dare scurry further out of view? He really did not want to have to explain himself. Not now. Not after all they'd been through. It was cold and wet and grubby down on the rails. He could smell metal and dead leaves and wet wood. The wheels towered huge above him. He tried to think himself invisible. I'm a pile of rags. I'm an old plastic bag, he said quietly under his breath. I don't exist. You can't see me. You'll never notice me. I'm just gone. I'm just some glop left over after the storm. He peered under the heavy, dirty carriage links, hoping to see legs walking along on the other side of the train, legs that would belong to people who would walk on by and get onto the train and never see him and never know that he existed. But they did see him. What's that? Said one in French. I don't know, said the other. They came over and peered. It's a person, a child. Charlie's heart sank. He had to think quickly. What was his priority? Must get on the train. What must not be allowed to happen? Not getting on the train. When was train leaving? Any minute. What would make these men put him on the train? Think, think, think. Bingo! Mummy, mummy, cried Charlie pathetically. I want my mummy. He started crying, just a bit. Actually, it was quite easy to fake because his feelings were running high, and actually now he came to cry it all out. It was true, he did want his mum badly, although they would not be quite how he would have chosen to express himself on the subject. He's lost, said one of the drivers. What are you doing down there? Are you all right? Here, get up. Charlie stood, trying to look as small, young, innocent and pathetic as possible. They had to see him as lost and sad, because otherwise they'd see him as trouble and bad, in which case they'd cart him off to the station master. Charlie rubbed his eyes. His face was filthy. "Where was the platform?" cried Charlie. "I was looking for Mummy and there was no platform," all which was true, of course. He was looking for his mum, and there was no platform. But the drivers took it to mean, as Charlie had hoped they would, that he had got off the train and fallen. So now they began to worry about getting into trouble for not having a platform beside the train and putting small boys in danger. And the nearest carriage was a first-class carriage. They didn't want any fuss from worried mothers and irate fathers with expensive tickets and high standards of travel safety. The driver and the guard looked at each other, perplexed. "Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up," thought Charlie. The station clock read 0028. They were in a hurry. In fact, they should have been in the cab 10 minutes ago. The train was due to leave. They didn't want trouble. "Oh God," said the guard, "there's Monsieur Blizzard." A small group of people, led by a man in a very smart uniform, was marching determinedly down the platform. The driver rolled his eyes. So they did what Charlie hoped they would do. They picked him up, opened the door of the train, and popped him inside. "You're all right now," said one, looking firmly at him. "You don't need to mention it." Charlie smiled bravely. "I won't," he said. "I'll just find my mum." The train guides rushed up onto the cab, and the head driver swore at them for being late. Charlie, knowing that the lions had seen and understood what had happened, looked up and down the elegant wood-panelled corridor in which he found himself, heaved a massive sigh of something like relief. He couldn't quite believe it. The first door in the corridor was open. He slipped in swiftly, locked it after him. He was in a bathroom. It was posher than anywhere he had ever seen before. The sink was of porcelain with a pattern of pink rosebuds scattered across it. The loose seat was polished dark wood. The little table was glass. The little curtain was crisp lace. The towels were fluffy and white. The walls were wood-panelled, and there was a small painting of a lady in a pink dress on a swing, surrounded by garlands of pink roses and two fat little cupids. Gosh, he was tired. This had been a long, long day. He sat down on the polished loose seat and finally let himself take a breath. He was here on the train. The lions were too. All had gone more and more or less according to plan in the end, except the new creature, of course, with his teeth and his howl. He wasn't part of the plan. He was, well, what on earth was he? In 30 seconds the train would leave. Please God, please everybody, keep Raffy back for 30 seconds. It smelt wonderful in here, like Christmas and honey and oranges. For the moment, the lions could blooming well look after themselves. The new creature could blooming well look after himself. Charlie was in a warm, dry place, about to leave for Venice, and he was knackered. He puffed a fluffy white towel towards him. The moment the train started to move, he would sleep. The distant sound of a dog barking was almost part of his dream, but it wasn't. It was there. Right outside the crisp white curtain, loud, insistent, and accompanied by shouting in English and French. Charlie jerked his head up. "You must stop the train! You must stop the train!" Charlie stared at the curtain. Very, very slowly he lifted the corner. "Listen, man, you must stop it. They're criminals. They're runaways." It was Raffy. He looked appalling, wet, furious, shouting, with green scum smearing his leather coat and blood down his face, his lips grey, his arms hanging limp, and his big, ugly dog slavering at his feet, jumping and barking as if desperate to get at the carriage and tear it from limb to limb. A guard was shouting at Raffy, telling him to control his dog. Someone shouted, "Fool, madman!" The train was beginning to creak and crunch. Doors were slamming, guards shouting to each other. Charlie couldn't see who Raffy was yelling at. He couldn't see what was happening. "Stop the train, man!" Raffy yelled. He looked like a lunatic. Charlie pressed his face to the cool glass of the window. Raffy turned. His little beard was matted with drying blood. His eyes were livid. He saw Charlie. Charlie saw him. The whistle blew. The train lurched. In slow jerks, Raffy's furious face disappeared from view. Ooh. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. I did.